Welcome, everyone. I'm Sue Barber, author, former IT director for a Fortune 500 company, turned executive coach, and this is the Visibility Factor podcast, where we explore how to raise your visibility and play bigger at work and in life. We'll explore key topics and welcome guests that help you shift your thinking about yourself so you can see new possibilities for your leadership. I'm on a mission to create a visibility movement for leaders to show their value and be seen for their true talent. Are you ready to take the next step towards a higher level of visibility for yourself? Let's go. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Visibility Factor podcast. This is Sue Barber, your host. I am so thrilled today to bring you my guest, Dr. Amy Climer. She is writing a fantastic book, and it's not coming out till February, but this is a sneak peek for all of you. You get to hear more about it and hear the great things that she has already done, but I know more are coming from her. And after reading her book, I think anyone who works on a team and wants to incorporate more creativity is going to love this episode. Welcome to the show, Amy. I'd love to have you do an introduction of yourself.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. So I am a consultant. I teach organizations how to be more innovative. I do a lot around creativity in teams and helping teams be more effective. And I've worked with all sorts of organizations from the Mayo Clinic to Fox Sports to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security. And I'm really excited to talk about my first book, which is called Deliberate Creative Teams: How to Lead for Innovative Results.
It is going to be fantastic. After I read all of the great stories and everything that you included in there, I just thought I can just see how beneficial this would be, especially for a team that might be struggling, a team that isn't quite sure how to come together under a, one purpose, right? So let's start off with your definition of creativity.
So my definition comes from like a conglomeration of research, and it's not a definition I created myself, but I really like it because it's very simple, which is creativity is novelty that is valuable. Ooh. So that's it.
So can you explain a little bit more about that? Because I have context because I read your book, but I think it would be interesting because I do think it's something that people have a lot of definitions for, right? Depending on how you grew up and what you know to be, I'm a good drawer or not, I'm good at art. I think a lot of people lump it into that category, which I know you talk about in the book, that that's not the only thing creativity is. But I think, how can people think about it for a team?
So one of the things that I often do when I'm working with teams is, or like if I'm doing a keynote, for instance, I'll ask the question, raise your hand if you think you're creative. And depending on the audience, anywhere from like 30% of the room to 80% of the room will raise their hand. Sometimes in a small group, everyone will raise their hand, but often they're just like, you can tell people are like, okay, I'm raising my hand because I think the right answer is yes. Not, they just are looking around, But then when I start asking people like one-on-one questions about, oh, why didn't you raise your hand? Why do you think you're not creative? And they'll say, oh, I can't draw. And I've, heard this for decades. And I can remember even in high school being frustrated by friends who's like, oh no, I'm not very creative. I can't draw. I'm like, no, creativity is not about drawing. And of course, at that point I had not researched anything on creativity, but I just knew intuitively that wasn't right. And so we do have all these weird, confusing, mixed messages around creativity. And really all it is solving a problem. So it's novelty, meaning something new, original, unique, different. Novelty that is valuable. And valuable could be interpreted in any way. It doesn't have to be financially valuable. It could be emotionally valuable. It could just be aesthetically valuable. Like, your child's, your 4-year-old's drawing, with crayons that you framed and put on the wall. It has no financial value, right? But it just brings such happiness and joy when you look at it. And that's good enough.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely the child that I was told I was not good at drawing and I was not good at creativity. And I lived with that story until many, many years later, which I talk about in my book, because I had no idea. And so I just shut that side of myself off. And it's so challenging to see now how much time I wasted by not doing that. And I know so many people, and you talk about it in the book, how many people have not held on to creativity because someone told them a story and they believed it. So let's talk about, why do you think this book is important now?
I really believe, well, this isn't a belief, this is, I think, a fact, is that we have a lot of problems on the planet, right? Some big, some small, but I mean, most of these problems we create as humans. And I really believe that we as humans have the capacity to solve pretty much all of these problems if we're willing and able to tap into our own creativity, to collaborate together and be innovative together. And I just imagine a world where everyone was living up to their full creative potential. And to me, that is like mind blowing, just that would be amazing. And I just think, in organizations, I see this all the time where teams are able to come together and they're able to collaborate and be creative. And all of a sudden they're able to solve a problem in a new way that no one had thought of. And it's really exciting. And I think it has a lot of positive change in the world.
Definitely. And I can think back when I was in corporate and when we would have these big, at the time we would think were impossible problems to solve. And amazingly, right, we come together and this group, comes together and comes up with ideas, and we tried to think out of the box. And we had some really great frameworks that we used at the time that I think really helped us allow us to have these big breakthroughs, and everything was on the table. And I think that made it so much easier. So you talk about the Mayo Clinic in your book, and the story at the beginning was so amazing, and I won't give it away, but I would love to hear you talk about the work you've done with them and what you see that they do around innovation that really helps them, succeed where others may not be as successful in the country.
Yeah, I've had the privilege to work with the Mayo Clinic a number of times. They brought me in to work with a selected group of leaders to help them look at creativity and innovation differently and understand how it works. And it was a profound experience because of the story I share in chapter 1, where the Mayo Clinic had a big impact on my existence, which I'll hold off on sharing that if anyone wants to read the book. So to be able to go and work with them was just a huge, it just felt like such a privilege, such a really cool opportunity of being able to give back. And I've been so impressed with them. I think one of the things they do is they really look at, it's interesting. I'm not even sure. Is it that they're looking at things differently? Is it that they're not stuck in a certain way of how the business of the hospital has to be? I feel like today we're in this place where the business of healthcare is often getting in the way of the actual healthcare. And I'm not an expert in healthcare by any means, so I don't want to get too far down that path because I don't know a ton about it, but it's just what I see both as an occasional patient and having worked with the Mayo Clinic as well as a couple other hospitals. But I think what the Mayo Clinic does really well is the doctors and the staff, they collaborate with each other in a way that a lot of other places don't, where the collaboration is I'm going to just write a simple 2-sentence note that another doctor will read versus actually having a conversation about the patient together. And I think it's just remarkable. And then they've also, if I remember the number correctly, there's 7,000 employees at the Mayo Clinic who are inventors, basically researchers and innovators. And so they have dedicated this whole group of people just to come up with new procedures, new techniques, new tools. And that's continues to just be amazing. I mean, if we look back, early 1900s, late 1800s till now, the Mayo Clinic, hands down, has changed healthcare around the world in ways that most of us have no clue that they've even influenced. Just one of the little examples that I thought was kind of fun is, how when you're at a doctor's office and there's all these, all the rooms, and you're put into a room and then they flip the little flags on the outside, those plastic flags. So that was invented by the Mayo Clinic just as a way for staff to communicate, the different flags mean something different, like this patient's ready or this patient's, this room needs to be cleaned or whatever it was. So I thought that was kind of fun.
That is cool. I had no idea. I just assumed, I never even thought about it actually. But I think, when you described that, how they come together, I thought of in a company, right? There's a lot of silos, and it feels like, for anybody who has a serious disease and needs multiple doctors, it can be a challenge because each doctor isn't talking to the other, and it feels a little competitive versus collaborative. So yeah, I do love that about them. That's amazing. So you talk about the 3 elements that people really need to be in a team and be creative together. I'd love for you to share those and help people understand what it really takes to bring that to life in a team.
Sure. Yeah. So as a result of the research I did for my dissertation, I identified 3 elements that teams need if they want to be creative together. And none of these are mind-blowing, right? It's just looking at it in a different way and just being really deliberate about it. So the first is team purpose, that a team needs to have a clear sense of their purpose. Like, what are we doing together? Why do we meet? Sometimes this is really obvious, like the marketing team, our job is to market the products of the company, right? But then sometimes it's not that obvious. For instance, I remember asking an executive team that I was working with. We were in a session together and I said, well, what do you all see as your purpose? And they kind of looked at each other, and one person said, oh, do you mean like the mission of our company? And I was like, well, that's like your company's purpose. But this team, why do you all get together every other week? And they couldn't answer the question. And it's like, okay, we have some work to do. We'll figure this out. And it was just kind of funny, like the top team of the organization couldn't answer that simple question. And so anyway, being clear on the team's purpose is really helpful. The second thing is team dynamics, and the team needs to be able to collaborate well together by having a strong level of trust with each other, being able to engage in some conflict. So not always be in constant conflict, but also not avoiding it. And so there's this sweet spot called creative abrasion. And then just being able to communicate well, but also communicating outside of the team so you don't become too insular. So that's team dynamics. And then, which basically you could also say it's just, do we work well together, right? And then team creative process, this is the one that most teams don't know about. And so this is, what is the process you're actually using to be creative together? And most teams don't even know there could be a process. And there are many out there. The one that I mostly use is called creative problem solving. And I don't think it matters too much which process you use, as long as everyone knows what it is and knows how to use it. And it helps you kind of work through, here's our challenge. Let's work through that till we get to the solution. So team purpose, team dynamics, and team creative process.
So you talk about in your book a couple of things. One is where you brought up the example, right, where they didn't even know that they should have one, I guess. But you also mentioned about a leader understanding the purpose and helping the team. Mm-hmm. And you had an example where that wasn't the case, right? Where the leader wasn't really sure what the purpose was either. So I think that's actually kind of common because the team is closer to what's happening in the organization sometimes and understands the details. And depending on the level of the leader, they may or may not have that understanding to be able to talk to it in terms of purpose. So can you share a little bit about how a team works through that situation?
Yeah. So I would say I've seen it the way you just described, where the team might be more clear on the purpose than the leader, especially if the leader's not a part of the team, isn't also a team member. But I've also seen it the flip, where the leader's really clear on the purpose, but the team isn't actually clear. And either way, I think the way to address it is more or less the same, where this is just a simple exercise. So everyone's together, say in a team meeting, give everybody an index card or a Post-it note or something, and have everyone write down a sentence or two of what they think is the team's purpose. And everyone do that quietly, and then just put them all in the middle of the table and see, what do we have? Like, is there alignment? Did everyone write more or less the same thing? Or is there a lot of differences? Or did some people write, I have no idea? And then if you see there is a lot of difference or confusion, okay, now we're going to get into a conversation of like, let's talk through this. What do we all see as the purpose? And then if there is a lot of alignment and you're like, oh yeah, then we're good. And it's not about crafting, perfect purpose sentence. But it's just making sure we're all on the same page, essentially. And then once you've done that and you know, like, okay, we're all on the same page, we're good, then I think it's a matter of continually referring back to that purpose. So bringing it up all the time of, somebody once has an idea to do something new, and then somebody else might ask, okay, how does that align with our team purpose? And if it aligns really well, then it's like, great, let's pursue this, or at least talk about it. If it doesn't align well, then like, okay, do we need to give this to somebody else? Is this just superfluous? We should ignore it. It just helps you stay focused, essentially, and not get, too distracted, because that's very easy to do.
Especially right now. And
right. There's so much.
Yeah, there's a lot. I love the simplicity of that, right? Let's just start with something and then figure out where to go. Because I think otherwise it can be just a lot of conversation and a lot of back and forth. I love let's put it on a piece of paper. Let's all look at it and go from there. So that is so cool. I love that. Would you describe your book as being for certain types of teams, or any team can really leverage your book?
The book is for teams who want to be more creative. I mean, yeah, and I would say not every team needs to be creative. Some teams are, their purpose is more almost transactional or just maintenance, and maybe they don't need to bring in any creativity, and that's okay. But I think if a team does want to be more innovative, then yeah, it makes sense. I wrote it with, I guess, the group that I had in mind was people working in organizations. So whether that's like a for-profit business, nonprofit, government, schools, education, like I've worked with all of them. So those are the kind of teams I have in mind versus, say, like a sports team. It might work for a sports team. I don't know. That's not my area of expertise, but if any of you are leading a sports team and you read it, you can tell me if it worked.
Yeah, maybe they'll hire you for that.
There you go.
One of the other things that you brought up was the difference between cooperation and collaboration. So I think if you could dive into the difference between cooperation and collaboration, that would be really great, I think, for people to understand.
Yes. So I think we use these words interchangeably by mistake. I think most people don't really think about the differences, which is one of the things that happens when you get a PhD or you write a book, is you really nerd out on definitions. Yeah. But cooperation is where a group of people come together, and I almost think of it as like sometimes parallel play. Like we get along well, we're enjoying each other, but we're sort of doing our own thing or our own piece. Whereas collaboration is where we come together and we're really truly working on a problem together. You share something, I share something, and together we can kind of meld that into something new, that it's truly collaborating. Whereas cooperating is, you could get it in both. And what's interesting is I think in both cases, it can look very similar. In both cases, like teams show up, they have meetings, they get along well or not, but that's sort of separate. But it's really, what does the work look like? Are you actually interacting where you're working together, which is collaboration? Or is it just you're kind of reporting out and everyone's doing their own thing and then coming back, which I would say is more cooperation?
Do you think the collaboration piece happens when there's more trust?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I would say trust and psychological safety are pretty critical to true collaboration.
Yeah, I've seen the same. And, since we talk about visibility on this podcast a lot, I think there's also the piece that you talk about. You mentioned imposter syndrome in your book as well as I do. And the things that hold people back from speaking up, right, is feeling psychological safety, feeling like their voice matters, that what they're going to say is going to make a difference. So I'd love to get your perspective on how that lines up with what you see in terms of teams and creativity as well.
Yeah, I think there's a really close connection there. I think that like a sign of a good team is if you have, so you're in a team meeting and a team that's like truly collaborating and truly working well together, you will see that people within the team members are speaking about the equal amount of time over an entire meeting. So say you have a 60-minute meeting, 10 people in the team, each person is speaking roughly about 6 minutes. If you add it up there, this was a study, and unfortunately I don't remember the reference off the top of my head. But that I think is really fascinating, that in order for true like collaboration and creativity to occur, then each team member is more or less like equally visible to each other. And, I have definitely been in situations where I show up to a team meeting and it's 2 or 3 people out of 10 who are doing almost all the talking. I'm like, why didn't you just send out an email? Yeah. Like there's no collaboration here. We're not even having a conversation. And I feel like it's a real loss because 10 people, 10 professionals showing up an hour of their time plus the transition time. That's a lot of brain power and just, energy that we're putting into this meeting. So let's make it worthwhile. So that's a piece of it. So then I think if you're in a situation where that's not happening, so I think you want to think about, okay, how do we increase everyone's visibility or everyone's voice in the room? And there's actually some really simple structures that you can do to change how the meeting is set up. So for instance, at the beginning of a meeting, kick it off where you ask a question that everyone needs to go around and answer. And I'm not talking about, share your favorite vacation. I mean, that's fine, but I'm talking about something related to the meeting. So if you're having a meeting about the budget, then you invite each person just to share like a couple of sentences about their perspectives or something they're concerned about or one thing they're hopeful for, whatever it is, but it's related to the topic. And now you've just gotten everyone's voice in the room. And there's something psychological for us that if we speak early in the meeting, we're more likely to continue to speak up. And so I try to do that a lot if I'm facilitating, is that within the first 5 or 10 minutes, then I make sure everyone has a voice in some way. And it could, even if it's like a bigger group, maybe that's happening at their table rather than in front of everyone, but it still translates often to the bigger group.
So I love that because one of the things I talk about is actually the opposite, but I love this even more because I will tell people, more introverted people, hesitate to speak up. And so I'll tell leaders of those people or people who are more shy, maybe just to ask a question and say at the end, I'm going to ask for everybody's input or their, takeaways, but to leave the introverted or shy people for last so that they have time to think about it and that they're not pressed to be the first one to answer. But I love that starting out even, one of the things I've done in my groups in the past was, what is the outcome you're looking for from this meeting? Or how can we make sure this meeting is a good use of our time? Something like that. And I think that is another way to maybe start and end. Maybe we combine ours together, Amy. So that we can make sure that people do have a voice, because I think that's true. I can see where if I've spoken up once, I'm definitely more likely to do it again. Mm-hmm. That makes so much sense.
Yeah. And I would say that this is really a both and, like what you said about, I have a question I want everyone to answer, but you can basically go in any order you want and let people jump in when they're ready. The other thing that I often do is give people a minute to write down their response. And so I'm a big fan of Post-it notes. Anytime I'm in a meeting, there's Post-it notes on the table. I really encourage people to always have Post-it notes ready because you just never know when you might want them. But to have people maybe, whatever the question is, write the response on a Post-it note and maybe put it in the middle of the room or put it up on the wall. Or, it depends on if you need to keep track of it or not. Sometimes it's just to give them a chance to reflect before they share. But yeah, I think anything we can do to, help people be more reflective or help people who are more nervous or introverted, which is not always the same. But I also think even that reflection time helps the extroverted people and it helps them get focused as well. So,
sure. Yeah, I'm a Post-it queen, so I totally... My desk used to be covered in Post-its because they were all like my things to remember. If they're not in front of me, I'll forget.
Yeah,
them.
exactly.
So one last thing I wanted to bring up was your deliberate creative team system. Is there anything you want to share about that to get people excited about what you're going to have in the book?
I think one of the big pieces, so what I shared, those 3 elements are the bulk of the system. But the most important thing is to be deliberate, to be creative. Like it will not happen by accident. And so if you want to be innovative and you just wait for a great idea, it's not going to happen. Like you have to put the work into it. And then that's when the ideas will come. And so basically, I just teach this system that groups can follow. In fact, just today I was on it right before we started the podcast. I was on a call with a client and I had done a program for a group of about 200 of their leaders in April. And then he was asking me if I would come work specifically with his location. And he said, he's like, one of the biggest things that I took from you back in April was learning that, we could be really intentional about this. We could set this up as a strategy, as a methodology, rather than, I think sometimes there's this belief that if we get too structured about innovation, it's not going to happen. And ironically, it's kind of the opposite, that if you structure it, it leads to more ideas and better ideas and different approaches, which is really cool.
It is really cool because I think people would only potentially do parts of your system. And I like the idea of thinking of it as a system to follow, a bit of structure. I think it helps people. I mean, you can veer outside the lines a little bit here and there, right? But I think it gives people something to follow, especially for people who may not be thinking that they're creative as leaders to begin with.
Exactly.
Like, maybe I am. I guess I'm doing it. This is great. We're coming up with ideas.
Exactly.
I love that. Is there anything else from the book that you want to share with the audience?
I guess something you just said sparked this is I am a firm believer, and this is backed by research, is that we all have incredible creative potential. So if you feel like you're not that creative, you are. It's just a matter of developing it. Creativity is a skill. It's a skill that you can develop just like you can become a better leader through practice and reflection and training. Creativity is the same thing. And I think that's really important for leaders to know.
Yes. I know Susie DeVille, who's been on the podcast a couple times, also talks about that and has been just amazing to help me find my own creativity. So I love that you're doing the same. We need more people to be thinking about that, doing it, and not limiting their ideas and their innovations and holding themselves back from doing more. Yeah. We need more problems to be solved, as you mentioned earlier. So love all of that. So we're going to transition into what I call the Rise Up and Be Visible quick tips. These are 4 questions that I ask everybody on the podcast. So I'd love to hear your answers. The first one is, what do you think visibility is and why did you answer that way?
I think visibility is being seen while also seeing others. And I think that it's like two-sided. I think that I think seeing others and really like recognizing them and who they are is just as important as others seeing you in that way. Mm-hmm. I feel like that to me, it's so interconnected.
Do you feel like people generally have one side versus the other? Like I can only see myself as visible, I can't see others, or vice versa?
I don't know. You've thought a lot more about visibility than me.
Than most.
Yeah, probably. I would say sometimes that happens. I don't know if it's like the trend or not. Mm-hmm. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true. And there's a part about being seen that helps you have that safety too, to speak up more. And I think once you have the support around you and know that you can, it just builds your confidence so much more because of that. And you feel like you can kind of fly, right? You can say whatever you want. But I think when you don't have that safety, it tends to minimize and makes you play small and don't share ideas, and you don't talk about the things that you think are important. And to me, like the trust, all of those things kind of come together because without trust, you don't have that either. So
yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Okay. So what are you doing to be visible?
Okay. So I think some of like the common things is just, in my work, I want to be more visible in part because I feel like I have a lot to share and I get really excited about creativity and innovation. And so some of it is like, posting online on social media and all of that, being on stage, like I'm a keynote speaker. And that actually has been a real progression for me. In fact, when I was a sophomore in college, for some reason, I really remember that year, I was super shy. And I was a part of this outdoor program that was partly how I learned how to facilitate. And by my senior year, they used to tease me about how shy I was when they first met me as a sophomore. Oh. Yeah, it was. And so I never would have thought that I would be on stage speaking to hundreds of people. So that's definitely been a progression of being more comfortable with like, okay, I'm going to be on stage and people are going to be looking at me and this is actually a good thing. And so part of it is like refining that craft of speaking and also of writing. Both of those I've been very intentional about in the last like 10 or 15 years of getting better and better at. And I think that really helps me be seen. I think one other thing that helps me really like want to be seen or have the guts to put stuff out, because, there's a risk, right? You can put some stuff out and there could be backlash. And the thing that's helped me is to think about that by doing that, I am in service of others. Like I'm doing this for other people. Like I'm sharing this because I think and deeply believe it will help other people. And I just love Marianne Williamson's passage from her book, A Return to Love, that playing small doesn't serve the world. And there's a whole paragraph around that. But I think about that a lot, that actually by being more visible, I can be in service and better service of others.
And live out your purpose, right? Yeah. For why you're here. I think about that too. And it took me a while as well to get to that place of being able to recognize that if I'm not speaking up or I'm not doing what I need to do, then no one's going to know about the book or visibility or how they can actually show up in a bigger way. So I definitely think about that too, but I didn't know that quote. I'm going to go grab that and put it on my desk.
I can send it to you. It's a great passage.
That's amazing. Okay. What is the best leadership or career advice you've ever received?
So when I was in college, actually the same program I was just talking about, one of the mentors there, his name is Sandy Cohn, and he gave some advice that has been so helpful. That when you're in a situation and you're in a leadership role and it's not going well or something's wrong and you don't know what to do, gather the group together and tell them. And he said, just point out like what you're noticing, what you're observing. Like, hey, this is what I'm noticing, whether it's dynamics or this is the problem we keep stumbling on or whatever it is. And then say, I don't know what to do. Can we figure this out together?
Yeah.
And I've done that a few times, many times, I should say. And it always works. It's kind of amazing.
It's really, I love that because it creates vulnerability for that leader, which is a little scary. I think, leaders think they have to have all the answers. And so if you can let that drop, it comes out so much better that they see you as a real person. You're much more relatable. And that you don't have to have all the answers. That's why I keep telling people, you have a team for a reason, people. Go use them. Leverage them to help you, right? You don't have to have all the answers. So if everybody just took that away from conversation today and started doing more of that, I think it changes the way teams work together all by itself, right? That's
absolutely
a big piece. What is a book you would recommend to the audience?
So I was trying to think of books that I've read recently, and I've been on this kick to be more intentional about how many books I read a year. So I'm on track to read 50 this year, which I'm very excited about.
Impressive.
And one of them I read at the beginning of the year, who you might know the author. It's by Liz Long, and it's called Navigating Shitstorms: How to Find Your True Path When Life Gets Rough. And it relates to things that might get in our own way, or how we get in our own way because of, learnings we've had as a kid or from all sorts of others' experiences. But how we get in our own way of being seen or being comfortable being seen. And she uses this brilliant metaphor of moving from Victim Town to Freedomville. And I don't know if I've ever read a book where someone has used a metaphor so consistently through the whole book. Have you read this book, Sue?
Yes, I have. And the stories are so incredible.
Yeah.
She has powerful stories that she has lived through. And I love just the way her humor, her way of looking at the world just comes through in a big way. She's just a wonderful person.
Yeah. So I'd recommend that book.
That's a great one. Okay. So how can people get in touch with you if you want to learn more about the book, about you, about what you do?
You can get in touch with me through my website, which is climerconsulting.com. And Climer is spelled Climer. You can also find me on LinkedIn. And then if you're interested in the book, you can go to deliberateCreativeTeams.com. And that'll take you to the book, and it'll be available, if all goes well, February 26, 2025. So it's written, and we're just in those final stages, which I'm really excited about.
It's the fun part, right? Where you're like, this is actually going to happen now.
Yeah.
It feels like forever. Right. It feels like a dream, right? How long has it taken you? I didn't ask you that question. I'm curious how long it took you to write.
Well, I finished my Ph.D. in 2016, and that's when I finished the research. And I got really serious about the writing. I tried all these, multiple times to start. And it wasn't until I met AJ Harper and signed up for her class, who I know you know, Sue, is when I actually got serious. And that was early 2023, I think. Like January 2023. So not horribly long, just there was a lot of thinking, a lot of procrastinating.
But that makes it so much easier to write because you've done all the thinking. It's the trying to write when you haven't thought about it enough yet. That's the real challenge.
That's true. Yes.
That wasn't my experience anyway. So, well, I loved our conversation today. I'm so excited for your book to get out in the world. And I can't wait for teams to really start to apply the things that you have been using yourself, but also done a lot of research on and done with so many companies. I think there's so many just different ways that they can start to think about that are really simple, right? I think it's not complicated, but if it's really simple to start applying these into a system that you can use with your team, with a small team or a large team, and really be able to bring creativity to life for that group. It's amazing.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you for having me on the show. It's been really fun talking to you.
Of course. All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining on the Visibility Factor podcast, and we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks so much for listening to the Visibility Factor podcast. Remember that visibility starts with small steps that are intentional and consistent each day. Be bold, be visible, be the leader you were meant to be. Find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Follow us on all of our social media platforms, which are highlighted in the show notes. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time on the Visibility Factor podcast.